Mijn naam is Dilan Yesilgöz-Zegerius. I will start in Dutch with one sentence, if I may. Ik ben Dilan Yesilgöz-Zegerius en ik heb vandaag een heel mooi gesprek over vrijheid met een hele bijzondere gast. Maar om hem verder voor te kunnen stellen aan jullie, moet ik switchen in taal. Monsieur Vassy, malheureusement, mon français n'est plus aussi bon qu'avant. So I will continue in English. No, that was it. And I hope that sentence wasn't totally wrong. But thank you so much. Thank you for your time. You are the French ambassador to the Netherlands. And we could continue also in Dutch, but you just told me not yet. Maybe later on, next time.
Nee, volgende keer proberen we dat in het Nederlands te doen, maar niet vandaag.
Okay. I think it's good enough, but we'll save that for the next talk we have. You have been serving as an ambassador in the Netherlands to the Netherlands since 2019. And although our countries are similar and we have a lot of similarities, I know we have also a lot of differences. So my first question is a predictable one. Some may say cheesy one. But I was wondering, when you first arrived to the Netherlands, and probably you have been here before, but when you just came to live here, what was your most surprising or different thing, you noticed about our culture and about our way of living? I know it's cheesy, but I was just wondering.
No. That's actually a very good question, but I have to answer with a different angle, because to be honest, most people here and in France tend to focus, when they look at the countries, on the differences rather than actually the similarities. And what really struck me when I arrived is that I was surprised to see many more things that were similar than what I expected. So of course we are not the same, and I think that's one of the great things about Europe. We are countries with a very, very long and deep history and deeply rooted values. I think it's fair to say that coming from Paris, the first thing that really amazed me in The Hague was the quality of life with the beach just there, and this ability of Dutch people to actually associate a very efficient professional life, but also a very strong insistence on the protection of their personal quality of life. And which creates, I think, a very positive mix for many people in this country, including French people that come here. I have around 25,000 French citizens living in the Netherlands, and I have to say that they actually integrate very quickly and love very much living in this country, because I think because of course of the opportunities that they find here, but also this balance they find between professional endeavors and the quality of their daily life. So that's but what really surprised me was actually that there were much more similarities than I would have expected. And I think since that's one of your topics, I think a lot of them have to do with the value sets that we have, and specifically, of course, in slightly different ways sometimes, but still it's there, a very strong insistence on personal freedom and personal emancipation as a baseline in the organization of society. So in a sense, I found that to be surprisingly common in a way.
Oh, that's a great answer, and also a very diplomatic answer. Maybe later on you will remember the differences, and I will come with more cheesy questions like did you taste haring and stuff like that. But we'll save it because we have an important subject to talk about. Yeah. The first time we've met. That was during the horrific attacks, the recent horrific attacks, I must say, in France, which started with the murder of Samuel Paty, the middle school teacher who was killed and beheaded by an Islamist terrorist. And we were all shaken by this attack, to put it mildly. But I know that it affected you also on a personal level, if I may say. And I've read in different interviews that it took you also a little bit back to your own childhood. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Look, I mean, my personal experience with France, and of course, I know it's not a scientific approach. It's really like the incarnated life experience that I have. Is actually that of an immigrant finding, the son of immigrants. I was born in France, but my parents come from South America. And when I was born, I didn't hold the French citizenship, so I became French at the age 2. So at the same time, together with my father. And the thing is that whatever criticism we can have about our countries in Europe, and I think it is actually healthy to look inwards and see what things we could do better, including in terms of welcoming immigrants, making sure that they find their place in society. Overall, my own experience is that of a country that took the son of 2 South American immigrants and made it an ambassador at the age 39. So, in essence, I can't say that I have massively found that the country was hostile to newcomers, and in a way. I think it has a lot to do with the values that we discussed, which were those of individual emancipation and the ability to find your place and build your own destiny. Mostly, and I think that's why the Samuel Paty episode was so tragic in a sense. Mostly through education. In a sense, when you are the son of poor immigrants living in a French suburb, like you're very, like the only opportunity you have is actually through school. So it is true that I was good at school. There is no question about it, and I consistently so. And so my experience has been that of a functioning meritocratic system. Of course, I am lucid about it, and I know not everyone does it. Opportunities are not the same exactly, and for everyone, and depend from the family background, from the neighborhood where you come from. But still, overall, I think it is functioning to some extent. We can always strive to do better, and that's why, for example, in France, in the last 2 years, we've decided to split into 2 the classes for younger children in the poorer neighborhoods. So you have now for children in 1st and 2nd grade, they are in classes of 14, 12 children. So in a sense, we are investing specifically there because we know they are facing specific challenges. But these are modalities to organize your meritocratic system and not contesting it. And that's something that is deeply in me. And of course, an attack on a school represents an attack on this ability to be together, to find your own place through knowledge, education. And so that's why the attack on Samuel Paty shook France so much, and beyond France, I have to say, in many other countries, including in the Netherlands, because it's really the attack on the school, and so the attack on the ability to decide through education what you will become, and on your freedom to build yourself in a way. And that's why it was indeed a bit personal.
Yes, and I think it made well, I think you reached lots of people by making it so personal as well. So it was a very profound message. And for me, as being a child of refugee parents, I can relate to the notion of knowing that freedom is never self-evident. When we take our freedom or our democracy for granted, then I think we forget to be on guard. And that would be a huge, huge mistake, I think. And maybe that's also the risk we have in well, in France, in the Netherlands, in Western Europe or the West, because we have generations after generation of being born and raised and never knowing war, thank goodness. But that also has a risk in it. If you don't know war, if you don't know terrible circumstances where your freedom is gone, then maybe you find it, you take it for granted. And then when it's being attacked, it might take a while before you realize that it's being attacked. You know, step by step, you are giving away your freedom. Because I wanted to go to the French tradition of secularism, which is very strong, and which means there's a strict separation between church and state. Could you tell us what it means in France?
Yeah.
You know, and in real life, where do you see this,
Yeah.
and what does it mean for the French people?
Yeah, I think it is fair to say that it is a particular construct from an historical and even philosophical standpoint. But it's also fair to say that it's not as aggressive as what people say. Basically, what laïcité is, it's first of all, of course, the freedom of religion. I mean, that's the baseline, and it's of course guaranteed in the Declaration for Human Rights, the French Declaration for Human Rights. It's of course guaranteed in the Constitution, and that's of course the baseline. And so you have a full right to be a religious person. You have a full right to be a conservative religious person. I mean, that is certainly not in question. You have a full right to express your religious sentiments in the streets and decide how you will behave accordingly to your religious beliefs. What laïcité adds to the simple question of separation of church and state that many countries have is that it imposes on the state a condition of neutrality that applies also to civil servants. So this is the maybe where we go slightly further than other European countries. So civil servants are asked to behave in a completely neutral way from a religious standpoint, so as to not express any preference or implicit pressure, let's say, on citizens. So that's maybe a first angle. And the second one is the issue of is in the bottom of the concept in many countries. To sum it up, separation of church and state has been a way to protect religion from the state. And in the French context, it goes both ways. Of course, the state cannot, let's say, interfere in the individual religious practices as long as you abide by the law, obviously. But also in reverse, in a way, the state, in our vision, also needs to be protected from possible encroachments by religious groups, and that's something that was initially, to be completely honest, considered as a reaction against the overreach of the Catholic Church in the French public space, and now applies to all religions. But in a sense, it's viewed in France as a way of having a functional civil society in which a religion at the individual level doesn't become a political object towards the state, I would say.
And I think that for many people in France, there's something to be proud of, that system of secularism that you have, and also something that should be protected. But at the same time, during the time that, well, in December, when we met also, or the end of last year, when your democracy was under attack, your way of living, which is similar to our way of living. So our way of living was under attack. There were people who were claiming that the attacks were actually France itself to blame.
Yeah.
And they took the secularism and they said, well, it was actually a blunt way of victim blaming. Let's say it like this. And I know you've said that also before, telling you basically that you had it coming. These attacks, you had it coming because secularism means, they said, suppressing religion and dividing people and saying Muslims are not welcome. And I know that you were, may I say it not non-diplomatically, pissed off when you read it. I know you would say it differently, but could you explain to us what happened? Because it was not one scientist or one person who said this. This came from different angles. And while you were under attack by Islamists, you were also under attack by, well, another new group that came on.
Yeah, I think there are two things at stake in a way. So first of all, I think that, and I think that's one of the a more general problem that we are facing. Freedom of expression is constitutionally guaranteed. I mean, it's like the very foundation of our way of life. In most European countries, and certainly in France, it's clearly stated as like that in the French Declaration for Human Rights. Like freedom of expression is one of the very fundamental rights that we have gained after the French Revolution, when we went through a democratization process. Of course, there are limits to freedom of expression, as in any country, and they are not so original. You cannot insult people. You cannot, of course, use your freedom of expression to call for arming someone or creating an obviously unsafe environment or hatred against groups, for example. So it is obvious that there are some limits to freedom of expression, but of course a state needs to organize these limits in the most narrow way so as to preserve the principle of freedom of expression. And in essence, I think you have every right to not like what people publish, and you have a full right not to like caricatures. And if you feel they are beyond the limits of the law, there is a wonderful thing that is called the legal system, and you can go to court and seek justice from the judicial system. So, after all, you can challenge the way we define freedom of expression in a legal way. So, I think what is really surprising in the tendency you describe, in which people end up under establishing again a kind of responsibility of the French institutions in the attacks, is that, first of all, in a sense, they undermine the principle. It means that they don't find the principle of freedom of expression so important, or then they say, yes, of course, there is freedom of expression, but, and as you know, nothing before the but matters. And the second really amazing thing, I have to say, is that you end up equating harmful speech, if you think it is harmful speech, it can be, let's the judge decide, and violence. And I think that's a tendency we see more and more when people tend to equate violent speech and violent actions. And the thing is that they are from two different worlds in a way. And by blurring this line, by saying that violent or what you deem violent or offensive creates a kind of right to react violently, you in fact are blurring the lines of that hold the society together. I mean, physical violence should be always inadmissible, and that's the baseline. And so the risk with that line of reasoning that looks into a kind of structural explanations to violence, it's not to say that it's completely over the top, but they always run a risk to putting the two issues at the same level. And the thing is that physical violence, as we've seen in the Capitol recently in the US or in other instances in our own democracies, is always beyond the line. I mean, and should be condemned. And that's something that I feel needs to be reestablished, like very simple principles. Freedom of expression is a constitutional right. Violence is not admissible. And sometimes because we develop two ideas that are sometimes too complex, we tend to forget the very, very basics of our samenleving.
Well, and yeah, I think you have, that's totally true. And I think it's also very dangerous because what you do when you look at the Capitol or at the murder of Samuel Paty, and all the horrible stuff we've seen recently, when you say, well, it's not the fault of the people who are doing it, but it's the system. It's what, they didn't have an option. That's what you're saying. And I think that's very dangerous, to be honest. And we've seen this also in the Netherlands, a few days after Samuel Paty was killed and beheaded. There were people in the Netherlands, they started a petition, which is their democratic right, of course, to do so. But in that petition, they said, we have to make laws which will forbid everybody to insult the prophet. And I was shocked by how can this be your first thought? There's a teacher who is being killed because he showed a cartoon of a prophet or somebody who looked like a prophet. We have in our country, in the Netherlands, in the same period that we had teachers who had to flee for their students. They couldn't go back to school because they were afraid of their own safety. And in those days, the first thing you think of is, well, if it was forbidden to insult the prophet, then this wouldn't have happened. So this is logics. This is what would happen. And I think that's so dangerous, and it takes away the responsibility of the people who are who should be held responsible. And I thought it was very powerful of you, from your position, to say, no, this is not okay. And you also wrote it in a Dutch paper and everything. And that's, of course, something you can do as an ambassador. You could also say, well, I will stay out of this. This will happen in the Netherlands. I just will follow it. Why did you find it very important to let your voice be heard?
Yeah, the way I did it, I think, was really because I found important to explain our perspective. It is true that we are confronted, with a very active groups and very determined groups of people whose agenda
from
is
all
not
over the world, right?
All over the world.
The people who are writing about it, about secularism and about the French system, they came from America, from all over the world.
So
were writing in New York Times
everyone
and
has
everywhere.
a point of view about France, and
Yeah.
I think we should take it as a compliment in a way. But the thing is that indeed we were faced as a country a few weeks ago. We were faced with a very organized campaign aiming at distorting what our value set is, basically claiming that France is hostile to one specific religion, Islam. That is not the case at all, and that's why we wanted to explain why we felt that our system is actually the one that preserves the most the ability of the individual to carry their lives and enjoy full freedom of religion. But we were faced with people that went as far as saying, we'll take two examples. So we had one former prime minister of a Southeast Asian country saying that people were entitled to physically arm French people. I think he even said killed on Twitter. So it took a few hours for Twitter to take down that tweet, but of course it was a very prominent account, and so that's pretty violent and aggressive. And on the other hand, there was a fabricated rumor because we are working on limiting the ability of people to do homeschooling for the children, as by the way, in the Netherlands, where it's extremely limited. It is much less limited right now in France, and we intend to limit it. And so to do that, you needed to have a school ID for children. Of course, it applies to all children, but then a rumor was spread that France was actually giving ID numbers to Muslim children to register them. I mention it, it's of course completely crazy, but I mention it because it ended up retweeted by a prominent Washington Post journalist from in Washington. And so in a sense, you are confronted with this huge amount of misinformation. And so you need to jump in the debate to at least straighten some facts, explain our perspective, and maybe simply explain that we are pursuing actually a very modest agenda of preserving our secular way of life and system, and confronting radical groups in their aim of expanding their clout on French society. So all that is pretty is extremely moderate and pretty modest actually, but the backlash was very strong. Of course, it aims at displacing the debate or moving it to other issues. And then indeed, as you say, you have two possibilities: either let things go or intervene. It's a balance of the two, of course, because sometimes you don't want to give too much importance to people that are really saying crazy things. But if you see that the debate is taking a lot of a large magnitude, in that sense, you might feel the need to participate in the debate just to have your voice heard. And so that's why at some point I felt the need to do that in November, even though I would underline, that will be my last point, and I said it in the press, I say it again here, I was really impressed by overall the vast majority of reactions were extremely supportive of France, and in a sense, I think that brings me back to my initial point that I felt that Dutch people understood what was at stake, because they also have very much individual liberties at the very core of their social organization, and so in a way, I felt they could relate easily to the issue.
I think so too, and I hope so too, actually. So what do you think that our countries can learn from each other on this subject these coming months, especially because you are developing, I'm sorry, you're developing, I believe, new rules and laws. And so what can we learn from each other to tackle this scary and horrific attacks and Islamic terrorists?
Yeah, I think we can, of course, work on the cases themselves, understand the strategies of these groups better. In a sense, each of us has developed its own experience and thankfully, the Netherlands hasn't been subject to that much violence. But there was one instance, actually before all this started in France, with the Theo van Gogh assassination, where there was actually a kind of, it's of course not the same, but a kind of similar event. And from there, I think your country has developed concepts and approaches that that can be useful to everyone. And of course, we have our own very painful experience of the last few years. So there are lots of lessons learned, and in a way, when President Macron, Angela Merkel, Chancellor Kurz, and Prime Minister Rutte met by video link a few weeks ago to address this issue of countering extremism. They were able to share the experience and see what were the concrete steps that could be taken, including towards social media, to make sure that the hateful content or the terrorist-related content can be taken out as quickly as possible. So we have this aim of taking out this content in 1 hour and making the platforms responsible for that, which is, of course, a way of countering the spreading of these ideas or these messages. I would add that another thing I think is important is to understand that many of the networks with which we are faced are actually international by nature. If you take the attacks on the Bataclan, it's well known that they were conceived and organized from Syria. And so if you take the most extremist groups, they have relations one with the others. But on the other hand, this counter discourse, simply reminding the importance of individual freedoms for our societies, is dealt with at the national level, as I see it, and not so much coordinated between Europeans. And the thing is that it is actually a core European value. And so I think personally that there would be some merit to making sure that these pretty vast groups of people actually that are involved in defending freedom of speech, academic freedom, individual freedoms in general, I think could coordinate more to make sure that they support each other in a way.
Yeah, that our voice is louder.
Yeah,
and we are always with more. Well, that's I think that's very nice. And not only a hope, but also an aim to conclude our conversation. But I was wondering, what are your plans for the coming months and years? Because we are happy to have you in the Netherlands for a long while. So what is your agenda? Where can we see you more, and what subjects? Because you are becoming a bekende Nederlander, very famous Dutchman. So what's your agenda?
No, I have no other agenda than serving my country. So
I know, okay,
so
that's a diplomatic answer, but what are your plans?
No, I am going to tell you, my country has given me so much that I intend to keep giving back. So as long as I will serve at will of my country, and otherwise I have personal aspirations. But to conclude, I think I'm extremely glad and happy to serve my country here because of the very powerful bilateral relation that we have, in particular in the current complex European context that we know, with the pandemic, with the recovery that we need to work on. But the baseline is that I have no other ambition than serving my country.
Okay, fair enough, and that's a great ambition, of course. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I think we could talk for hours and hours because there's so much we can talk about between our countries, and looking at everything we are doing right now and the ambitions we all have. But that's maybe for the next time in Dutch, obviously. Uiteraard, of course. So for now, I can only thank you for this conversation about freedom and why it's so important to protect it and defend it and never see it as for granted. So thank you so much, Monsieur Vassy.
Dank u wel en tot de volgende keer.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.